Welcome to another episode of Paranormal, the new normal. I'm your host, as always, Jeremy, and I am here to try to make the world a little more normal. Does it ever happen? No. But you know what? We keep trying because that's what soldiers do. They carry on and face the adversity, and that's what we're doing tonight. So my guest tonight might actually help us make the world seem a little more normal, at least from what we can perceive. And my guest tonight is Ann Hall, astrophysicist and a member of the Average Scientist Collective. I didn't know what to call you guys, but
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
collective, group of mad scientists trying to take over the world, whichever one works, you know?
Well, thank you for having me, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast and live.
Yes, I'm glad to have you on, Ian. And first things first, how's it going over there where you are? Because I know it's late.
It is late, yeah. It's just past midnight, so it's my favourite time of the evening. Actually, it's nice and quiet. Everyone else is in bed, and yeah, it's pretty nice and peaceful. So I'm looking forward to a nice chat with you. But the best chats always happen late at night, anyway. So I'm good.
I agree. I've been in many bars where that happens. So,
Me too. Me too.
well, see, the first question I ask everybody on this show is, what got you into this world of paranormal supernaturalness?
Well, for me, I suppose it's more directed at science rather than necessarily paranormal as such. But yeah, I guess from a young age, I've always had kind of a fascination with numbers. That was a big thing when I was growing up. I was quite a nerd, which wasn't fashionable at the time, and then now since has become fashionable when it's too late for me to take advantage of that. and and I was kind of fascinated by these TV programs that we used to show in the 80s in the UK. So things like Arthur C. Clarke's World of Strange Powers, if you ever saw that. We had a show on the BBC called Tomorrow's World, which was kind of a science-based program about technology and sort of future innovation and things like that. And ultimately, then just moving on, sort of graduating through to things like The Sky at Night with Patrick Moore, and then some of the other science documentaries. So that's kind of how it grew, if you like. And yeah, I just always had that strange fascination with the night sky and how things worked, but not like, I guess like where my friends were tinkering around with how stuff worked, like they'd take bits of electronic pieces and stuff like that. I was kind of like more wondering how the moon worked and stuff. So it was a little bit of a fascination with everything numbers based, I think.
Which is the best way to get into it, honestly. That's the best way to get into it. But all right, my next question I ask everybody is, have you had any supernatural paranormal experiences, whether it be alien related or cryptid related or spirit ghost related?
Certainly a few experiences that have been cryptic, probably none that I would necessarily deem as paranormal or supernatural. And I think that, the natural thing is with science, you tend to look at these things extremely objectively, and look for evidence and that type of stuff to kind of underline your experience. So I've seen tons of things that perhaps I couldn't explain, but that doesn't necessarily mean to me that nobody could explain them. So I guess that's a bit of a cop out on that question, Jeremy, really. But I think I'll probably
Seems that way
on that one.
It seems that way, but that's all right. Not everybody experiences the crazy stuff that happens in this planet or on this planet or around this planet. I personally am not that much of an experiencer either, so I could pity you, and I could recognize that pity as pity I felt for myself for many years now. But all right, so you grew up just wanting to learn about space, basically. So that was your road down to being what you eventually became, which is an astrophysicist. So let me ask the question that is pretty much the reason you're on the show. are we alone in the universe?
Well, I would have said that absolutely not. As an astrophysicist, I think, or as a scientist, I think people often think that guys like us would immediately take a really hard scientific stance on that. And this is, I think, where we can be a little bit more subjective with our answer. We can certainly, from my perspective, I could examine some of the information that I've learned and that I know, and for me, most definitely not. There is no one, Jeremy, maybe with the exception of you and some of your listeners, that would be less surprised if a flying saucer landed on the White House lawn than me. The chances of that, whilst it still feels fairly remote, the possibility of microbial life in the universe is virtually 100%. I think that we'll almost certainly prove that when human beings travel to Mars. Intelligent life in the universe, I think, is more rare, but it's so vast with so many different possibilities. Not only intelligent life in the sense of carbon-based life, like we would recognize within ourselves, but even life that's based on a different base chemistry, or just a different version of life altogether, a second genesis or a third genesis. It's not likely in my view. It's inevitable.
I am 100% with you on that. Yeah, Moose and Munch can agree too. I'm 100% with you on that. Like, it's just like I've seen things in the sky that I can't explain, and the government straight out admitted that UFOs exist, that things in the air that they can't explain, and I don't believe for a second they can't explain them. But I'm just gonna go with it for now.
Sure.
And what's going on, Matt? Glad you're watching. But let me ask you this. How did it take the astrophysicist community by storm when the government admitted during COVID that UFOs are real?
I think that we don't take as much notice of that, perhaps as other people think we would, or maybe as even we should. I think we get so tied up with our own work and our own research, and that can sometimes be all-consuming. So we take. I'm not going to say I didn't hear about that. Of course, I heard about that, and actually, I'm a huge follower of this story in particular. So this, and I'm sure you know about this, and your listeners will do as well. This whole story that's kind of weaving out about Bob Lazar, Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, Luis Elizondo, all of these guys that are involved, and the guy from Blink 182 as well, Tom DeLonge, isn't it, from the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. All these guys are like huge, and I've started to watch some of this stuff. And what I found most compelling about that, and I guess, maybe we could have a chat about Bob Lazar in a minute. I've got a few views on Bob, which might interest some of your viewers. And it's not I don't disbelieve him, but I just think some of the evidence that he put up in the past is just kind of inevitable rather than anything miraculous. But one thing that was really compelling to me when I watched it was the testimony of Commander David Fravor. Have you seen anything with Commander Fravor?
Go ahead. Tell my kid to be quiet.
Yeah. So, have you seen this testimony from Commander Fravor?
I might have heard it. I hear a lot of things in other podcasts, and I don't always recognize names. But
he was a Navy pilot. So he was an F-18 Navy pilot, a very high-ranking pilot by all accounts. I think he was the squadron leader of the Black Aces in the U.S. Navy, which is a hugely significant and influential attachment of the U.S. Navy. And he reportedly chased a UFO somewhere off the American coast in a Navy exercise. Now, that's always got to be quite compelling, hasn't it, when someone of that magnitude comes forward and provides some testimony like that. So that was very interesting to me. And I think a few of my colleagues certainly more than raised an eyebrow when that information came out. I guess when someone of real authority does provide some evidence and some testimony like that, it does make us listen. So yeah, I just don't. I think in terms of the governments and stuff like that, I don't know how you feel about your governments and stuff in the US. I just don't think that the government, certainly the government in the UK, is capable of playing like that level of 4D chess to keep this, to keep this type of thing a secret from us. I mean, again, I don't know what it's like where you guys live, but certainly around my area where I live and in our country, they can't even get the roads correct. There's big holes in the road and stuff. So I'm not sure whether they're playing 4D chess with aliens at this point.
I mean, personally, and I mean, I know a lot of people that feel the same way. In America, we don't trust our government as far as we can throw most of the old geezers. But I mean, and yeah, we got potholes in the road too, and they're redoing roads constantly because they can't do them right the first time. But just because one section of the government proves inequity to being suitable for us doesn't mean that the big dogs don't know what's going on, and it doesn't mean there's some there might be some kind of X-Files type deal in the background here where they get saved supposedly if they sacrifice so many humans to experimentation or what have you. I mean, put it this way. All right, well, say what you want to say, then I'll answer the question I want to ask you.
No, shoot, you go.
All right. Have you heard of the case of Valiant Thor?
I don't think I have heard that case. No, tell me about it.
All right. It's an my listeners know about this because I've talked about it before, but it's an American case, and it was when Eisenhower was president. I think back in the 60s, 70s. I'm not that great at my presidents anymore, but been out of school for a long time now, half my life. But basically, this Norse alien, as they call them, human-looking aliens, supposedly came down and actually met President Eisenhower. Basically landed on the White House lawn almost, but he didn't because otherwise it'd be more in the news. But you can find news articles about this. And he met President Eisenhower, and he was on Earth for a good couple months, meeting with the Pentagon and President Eisenhower, and maybe some British intelligence too. I don't know. No one really knows the full details of what this creature did on Earth, but supposedly he was trying to dissuade us all from doing nuclear engagements with each other.
Sure.
Because his race was more advanced and he knew what he was talking about, which you think we'd really listen, but we don't really listen to anybody. We're human. And I mean, there's so much proof of this that Eisenhower's daughter even claimed it was real and it happened. She met the creature. I don't want to call him a man, but she met the creature. And I mean, so there's been verified proof that this supposedly happened. So, I mean, that's kind of why I go along the lines of the government knows, and there already are extraterrestrials on Earth, most likely. I mean, I would almost bet on it because why wouldn't there be? Even if they're disguised like Men in Black style or whatever have you, like they're on Earth somehow, and even if there's one sitting down in a secret office of the White House or Pentagon somewhere that no one knows about, there's extraterrestrials that have been helping like guide us for the last 50, 60 years at least. At least.
So I guess I never really think about these things like this. I think. So do you think that the governments are capable of keeping secrets at that level?
Yes, because I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen like the Nicolas Cage movie, National Treasure: Book of Secrets, but
yeah, I've seen the movie. Yeah,
there is 100%, and this is confirmed by multiple presidents. There is information that only gets passed down from president to president, and there is also information that even presidents are not allowed to know about. It's at the highest ranks of the military, and even the presidents are not. I can't think of the word, but even the presidents are not like allowed to hear it.
Okay. I mean, I can be devil's advocate there a little bit and explain a little bit about how that works from my perspective, because I do some work in this area. So one of the projects that we're involved in quite heavily is the SETI project. So UCLA SETI, which is, if your listeners don't know what SETI is, it's the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So this is I guess, precisely what you're talking about. And that this SETI project is done in a number of different ways. It's been going on for a lot of years. It was once funded by the government, was funded by the US government for a while, but now is privately funded. And this process is mainly examining radio signals. So this is what we try to do. We look at well, two different things really. One is radio transmissions, and the other one is around sort of transiting planets around stars outside of the Milky Way galaxy. So this is a couple of different things, and we don't find any evidence of any presence as yet. So there's no real evidence that's been put forward to suggest that any of this extraterrestrial presence is available for us to see. If we were kind of capable, I suppose, if these extraterrestrials were capable of traversing the distances that needed to be traveled between star systems, we would see their technological signature written across the sky, but we don't see that. And actually, that's filtered away from it's filtered away from governments as such, in terms of it being just purely scientific research. So I don't bounce that off a government official when I look through that type of data, unless, of course, we think that data's been filtered before it's come to me. But I guess from my perspective, I would say I probably don't agree with you on that point, in terms of the fact that I just don't see any evidence of it in the technological signatures that we look for when we do that SETI work.
Well, and that poses the other question I was hoping to get to at some point. It's the whole debate of extraterrestrial versus ultra-terrestrial, which,
okay,
if you don't know what ultra-terrestrial is, and for those listeners who don't, I'm sure you do because you heard me say it before, but ultra-terrestrial means traveling through dimensions rather than through space like extraterrestrials would, at least in the classic sense of what we believe extraterrestrials to be.
Okay.
So what if they're traveling through dimensions to get here, and that's why you can't track any technological trace of them?
So it's a good point, and I think that the great thing about science is that we will hold our hands up and say, okay, sure, we don't know the answer to that. So some of the work on that area is probably work that's done at CERN in Geneva on the Hadron Collider. So this would be more in the sort of particle physics. We're looking here, aren't we, for some other kind of force or something that interacts with matter in that way. That's what we're looking for when we're looking transdimensionally. And as yet, that nothing has been discovered at CERN. But I'm a big believer in this, and I think if you've not heard this before, I'd love to lay claim to this quote, but it's not mine. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. And I think that's where I think as scientists, that's where we sit on that. So we'd have to hold our hands up and say, do you know what? Yeah, that's possible.
It's actually one of the most common belief theories that they are traveling through dimensions, because it'd be a lot easier than traveling through space, because space travel is
we wouldn't do that.
Efficient.
Yeah,
it's not efficient.
Yeah, we wouldn't do that. So again, just to sort of kind of put into context some of the distances for your listeners, if this helps you. So the nearest star system to us, apart from obviously the nearest star to us apart from our sun, is the Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri system, and using the fastest machine that we've ever built, which is a Saturn V rocket. If we set off on that journey today, it would probably take us 30,000 years to get to that star system. So I do tend to agree with you that if we were to try and traverse these distances in a linear fashion, i.e. traveling from sort of A to B in a straight line, that really isn't practical. It's going to take us 6 months to get to Mars, and that's next door. So these distances are not ones that can easily be covered by traveling in a straight line. So I do tend to agree in a certain sense that if we were super clever, if our physics and our science was a lot more refined and a lot more mature than it is today, then I would like to think that we probably wouldn't be traveling in straight lines in 500 years' time. We would have found a way to get from A to B in a more intelligent manner.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, it's like light speed or warp speed, or I mean, there's a million science fiction names for it, but or even like if you want to look at it as like going to the quantum zone, if you want to talk like Quantumania.
Yeah, sure.
Like that's just the way it is.
But, I mean, it's very possible in terms of the sort of wormhole theory. So this is something that a lot of people sort of talk about. This, is it possible to travel through a wormhole from one part of space to another part of space? And that is absolutely possible in terms of being theoretically possible. So in 1915, Albert Einstein did his great work, The General Theory of Relativity, and that predicted a lot of different types of phenomena. It predicted the manifold of space-time, which we know is true. It predicted that space-time is four-dimensional, so 3 spatial dimensions, 1 temporal dimension. We know that that's true. The LIGO experiment, if your viewers know, or if your listeners know anything about LIGO, which is a gravitational experiment of in 2015, we detected gravitational waves. So we absolutely understand that that is real. And that theory of relativity predicted not only the manifold of space-time and things like black holes, but it also predicted wormholes. So mathematically, wormholes are absolutely possible. So there's no reason why that wouldn't, couldn't, or shouldn't be proved in the next X amount of years when we find a way to, I guess, work on that in a manner that's not theoretical. I think we would have to observe one. It feels like quite a dangerous experiment to try and make a wormhole. So I don't think that that's a road that we would necessarily go down. But we may observe one that's either natural or has been manufactured.
We'll get into that in a minute because you brought up CERN, and I want to get into that. But first off, I want to say hello to my brother Anthony Sabalos. Hey, buddy, what's up? Anthony's episode of this that when he was on my show drops next Wednesday, so everybody check it out. But you brought up CERN, and
I did.
I mean, there's all these memes on Facebook and everything for CERN that like, do you want to open the upside down? Because this is how you open the upside down. And I mean, I don't know. Could CERN be getting us into more trouble than we're willing to deal with or able to deal with?
No, I think they're pretty safe. I think they're pretty safe with what they're doing. There was a lot of, I guess, concern when the Large Hadron Collider first switched on. I think I heard people calling it like the black hole machine and stuff, which was quite sensationalist. So no, I don't think that we'd be in trouble from any of CERN's activities. I think what they're doing is quite safe, and actually, it's not actually physically possible for a black hole to swallow up the whole universe anyway. There's more matter in the universe than a black hole can hold in one go, and they radiate as well with Hawking radiation, so they don't last forever. So I think we're pretty safe. CERN can carry on accelerating particles underneath France and Switzerland for a while, and I think those guys will be okay. So if you are living anywhere in France or Switzerland near the Hadron Collider, there's no need to move at the moment. I think you'll be okay
until Demi-Hydron comes through your portal there, and you see it out your window. The Demi-Gorgon's gonna be there waiting for you, but until that day,
you'll be okay.
And there's also theories on the more conspiracy side of things that the Illuminati or the NWO have their own reasons for supporting CERN and wanting it to open up.
Yeah, I've heard a few of those. I think, and I guess I know a couple of people that work at CERN, and I don't necessarily think it's a concern of theirs. And actually, if you want to go visit CERN, you can do that now. They've spent a lot of money actually on a brand new visitor center called the Science Gateway. And I'm not sure whether that's open now or whether it's going to be open in a few weeks, but certainly at some point, summer 23, that's open. So you can go along to CERN and you can observe what's going on there. Obviously, they won't let you into any of the underground parts because it's quite dangerous, but you can have a tour around the facility in the overground part and talk to some of the outreach team and the physicists. They're quite open with what they're doing.
Yes, you can go. You can't see the part that the reptilians and Illuminati are planning the world destruction in, but you can see the rest of it. And if any supporter of the show wants to pay for me to go to Switzerland and do a live episode from the CERN tour, be my guest, because I will gladly do it. But I need some financial support for that one because I can't make it to Switzerland on my own buck. But
it's quite a long way from you, Jeremy.
I'm sure. I mean, there are a lot of countries I'd love to go to, but it's just not financial stability that's going to do that. But well, since I brought it up, what do you think of the idea that there is a society of reptilian extraterrestrials that supposedly have been on Earth since the beginning of time?
Again, I would have to cast some aspersions over that, and just I guess from a personal perspective, just casting aside the science part at the moment, I don't think that within the UK, certainly, that our government are capable of keeping a secret at that level. I really don't. I guess if you saw, and I'm sure you guys did, some of the stuff that was going on during COVID with our government is quite embarrassing. So, that type of stuff, I don't think that they would be capable of keeping a secret at that level without treachery spilling that out for a tabloid story or something. So, I don't know. I guess in terms of, I think, governments keep secrets. Obviously, I think we'd all be worried, wouldn't we, if our government and our military weren't keeping secrets from us? They definitely should be doing that for our protection. But secrets at that level, I'm not sure. Is that so? Is that your opinion? Are you supportive of that? And what do you think? I suppose I've almost taken over as a host of your podcast now. What do you think that these beings are bringing? Do you think they're bringing us technology? Do you think they're bringing us advice?
Well, put it this way, and it may seem nostalgia based, but one of my favorite books when I was a kid was My Teacher's an Alien, and it turned into a series eventually.
Yeah.
And one of the main theories they posed in this fiction book, supposedly, was that Einstein was an alien, and most of the scientific greats of our world were aliens who helped humanity reach the next point in scientific development. So,
sure.
I don't know what I believe, honestly. I mean,
it's crazy,
look, go ahead. I want to hear what you guys say.
I was just going to say, Einstein wasn't even a scientist. I mean, he was probably one of the greatest scientists of all time. He was actually a patent clerk, and he wrote the theory of general relativity in his spare time. So it was a side hustle for Einstein, which was not bad because turns out he was actually pretty good at it. But one of his great quotes, and I love this quote. He said, "To be a great theoretical physicist, you need less knowledge and more imagination." And
which is true.
Yeah, it's really true. It's very, very true. To dream up something as elaborate and as beautiful as the theory of general relativity and the curvature of space-time and all this type of stuff, it would be, it's crazy. I've studied this stuff for a long time, and my brain just does not work in that way. I can learn stuff, I can do experiments, I can do research, I can write, I can do all this different stuff. But there are very few people, I think, that can think in that kind of creative but almost beautifully scientific way and then go on for generations afterwards and be proved to be correct. It's amazing. So in a way, was Einstein an alien? He was definitely different to you and me, Jeremy. He was definitely different to you and me. No question about that.
I mean, I didn't marry my cousin, so yeah. But
there's that as well, yeah.
I mean, every time I think of Einstein, it brings me back to the Family Guy clip where like it shows him as a patent clerk, and like someone comes up with an invention, and like he slams their head in the window and takes the patent and like files it himself. Like it's freaking hilarious. Which it's funny because he was accused of doing that, and like that.
It
And
was,
I mean,
yeah. Fair.
if you want to look at another figure, I mean, Tesla. He was one of the greatest minds ever, and then he just straight disappears, unexplained. No one to this day can explain what happened to Tesla. And to take from Men in Black, I'm just going to change the person they're talking about. What if he went home?
Yeah. I guess we don't know. I mean, he was kind of crazy. He was kind of experimenting with some stuff, wasn't he? That was potentially very damaging to
religion, government, everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, to some large organizations. You know, when some guy steps up and says, "Oh, I'm gonna zap everyone electric through the air and give it to them," because they're kind of dangerous experiments. But also, you know, that would have had a huge impact on the future of the utilities companies and all that sort of thing. And I think there's been this, you know, there's been this sort of transition, hasn't there, over to things like electric vehicles and potentially in the future hydrogen-based vehicles, and that has met with a resistance for a long time, I think, from the energy companies and the fuel companies, because we're kind of moving away from needing, you know, petrol and diesel in our cars, and that has a huge impact financially on people. So I think there's always a case of you know, science is controlled in some areas for sure. You know, research is almost certainly paid for by large organizations, not necessarily in what I do all the time. I don't think that finding, you know, planets around foreign, you know, around alien suns or exo moons or star quakes or anything else, I don't think this is particularly interesting. But when we get onto the sort of stuff like we briefly touched on with Bob Lazar, where he was, you know, where we're talking about things that could be involved in propulsion or anything that could potentially be weaponized, these sorts of things become then massively contentious, don't they, as to where and how that research is conducted and what is ultimately done with the results of that research, and maybe also the scientists that conduct it.
Exactly. I mean, just I don't know. Tesla's always been an enigma to me because, like, and in the paranormal field, he's a huge name because he believed in spirits, and so, I mean, Einstein did too, but Tesla actually worked at trying to prove that spirits are real, and he thought he had ways to communicate with them. So there's a huge. Yeah, I know, Moose. He did, but there's a huge love for Tesla in the paranormal spiritual community. Like, there's a huge love for him, and it's just, and his disappearance just adds to the paranormal field because it's just like all these things he was discovering. Why was he discovering them? Like, why did they make him disappear because of it? Like, someone had to make him disappear. He didn't disappear on his own. I mean, I've heard reports that people went to his apartment and found like everything was just left the way he always had it. Like, he did. It's not like he packed up and left and went somewhere. Like, he just vanished one day.
He left in a hurry,
or left with a bag over his head with two men grabbing his arms. But I mean, yeah.
But it could have been. It could have been. Who knows? But I think so. Do you guys think that this sort of work is going on now? I mean, maybe I can help to shed some light on what goes on inside my organization, or what goes on in terms of my sort of research, because it's not like we don't get involved in this. I think for me, all of this stuff works around. I would have a very similar discussion with guys like you as I would have with people who were religious. So people who came to me and they were like, it was if I was talking to a bishop or if I was talking to a minister, and for those guys, I would say that absolutely there's room for philosophy and a belief system in whatever that might be, as long as that works within the framework of science. Because I think sometimes there's a common misconception that science works in a similar way to conjecture or a belief system, and it doesn't. We work on facts which are kind of proven over and over and over again. And sometimes science changes its mind. And I think that can be our worst folly sometimes. Like, people will say to me, well, you told me that, and then 10 years later turns out you're wrong. So you weren't telling me the truth at the time. And we can say to that, the retort to that is, well, 10 years ago science didn't lie to you. It's just that now 10 years later it learned some more. So we're refining, and that framework is built on year after year after year after year, and we become way better at doing things like detecting. So this sort of thing, if we're talking about kind of like spirit energy and things like that, this is something that that physicists at the Large Hadron Collider would have absolutely identified. A fifth force which interacts with matter would be something that would have been, the Hadron Collider would have seen that, and we haven't seen that. So I would never dispel anybody's belief system and say, yeah, you're wrong, but because we don't know. But I can certainly say that the quite expensive and comprehensive experiments that have been conducted over things like that would suggest that there isn't a fifth force that interacts even weakly with matter, let alone strongly with matter in that sense. So I guess that's where we would come to it from a scientific perspective. We would try to nail down the facts. And I love this when we talk about, when I talk to people about UFOs and things all the time. And I'm always quite kind of challenging with them when they say this. And I'm like, guys, the clue is in the U. Like, you shouldn't get any further past that. And it sort of makes me laugh when people say, oh, I've seen something, it's a UFO. I don't know what it is, therefore it must be aliens. I'm like, wow, that escalated quickly. Like 3 seconds ago, you didn't know what it was, and now you've identified it as a craft from another planet with an intelligent civilization on board. That's a big leap from I don't know what it was to I know exactly what it is. So I think that's probably where we sit on things like this. It's not that we disagree, or it's not that we think that anybody is wrong or foolish for their opinion. It's just that we kind of work on this methodical fact basis, where each of those facts is researched and proven and repeated, and we come to a conclusion based on that. So if I spout some evidence back, or if I lay some facts on the table, those facts in that frame have been researched and repeated within that framework over and over again, which I think should make us more confident that they're a better representation of the truth as we understand it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I mean, and of course, you're going to look at everything from a more scientific angle than I would, because you're a scientist by nature. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, I was of a scientific mind most of my life until I got into the paranormal, and just there's more out there than science can explain, and that's the problem. Like that's the biggest issue with the paranormal, is there's more out there than science can explain. Sure. But what do you think, though, of like a couple months ago when there's all these reports of UFOs being shot down by people over America? And supposedly the government says, oh, it's Chinese weather balloons that are trying to record us. Yeah, okay.
That was a strange one, wasn't it? That was a strange one. Yeah, I mean, it's gathering pace again at the moment, isn't it? There seems to be a lot of this stuff. And, I think that we've seen from events that have gone on in the past that sometimes explaining things off as something that the general public would buy into on a large scale, like UFOs, is a convenient smokescreen. Sometimes, like, it's the lesser of two evils. Who knows what was going on? But if people want to believe that story, actually that's quite convenient for us, because there's something far more sinister or far worse or far more embarrassing that actually went on. So yeah, I mean, I guess my problem with this, and I don't know, I'm a big advocate of one of your own sons, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I listen to him a lot on this subject, and I totally agree with him. And I would just say, like, we live in a society now where a huge percentage of people have got like a 4K high definition camera in their pocket. Jeremy, I've got a 4K doorbell. How crazy is that? I can see when someone rings the doorbell at my house. I can see them in 4K before they enter my house. So I would kind of say to this, where are the images? There are so many cameras out there. I can understand it from the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s or even the 90s. But these days, everyone, or not everyone, but a huge percentage of people are carrying these high definition cameras around in their pocket. And, we can talk to each other like you and I are doing now. And, we can have this conversation, and our conversation is unrestricted, and we're communicating over thousands of miles, and our voices and our images are flying through the sky. There's no reason why we shouldn't have seen pictures of these things, is there? That would be my view on it. It's just a personal view, actually, nothing scientific at all. I'm like, show me the pictures. I want to. Nobody wants to see the pictures more than me.
Well, let me put it this way: you're from the UK, correct?
I am indeed, yeah.
Have you heard of Russ Kellett?
No, I don't think I have heard of Russ Kellett. Presumably, he is a UK guy, is he? What does he do?
Russ Kellett, he was a guest on my show at one point, and he now runs his own show around extraterrestrials and UFOs over in UK. He's been on the UK news a lot and whatnot as well. He, since he was a teenager, has supposedly been abducted by extraterrestrials to fight in one of their armies.
Really? This is where you'll have to find out whereabouts in the UK he lives. I'd love to talk to him.
And I mean, I'll have to send you his page. But I mean, he has his own podcast. He has his own podcast interview series now as well, and he has pictures of stories like crazy of him being taken by extraterrestrials since he was a teenager, and he draws what he remembers them looking like. And I mean, you couldn't think of the things he draws off the top of your head. The fact that you live in the UK, I had to bring him up because it's just I know somebody in the UK who's been abducted by aliens for years.
That's two of us now. We're probably neighbors.
I don't know about that. I mean, the UK is huge, but it's decent size at least. It's no America, but it's pretty damn big size. So there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people there too. I know a lot of people in the UK, but
it's certainly bigger than people think, I think.
Oh God, yes. I mean, don't go by what the map shows you, people. It's bigger than it looks in the picture. Put it that way. But
yeah, it is, yeah.
but I'm gonna go back a little bit. We're talking about extraterrestrials being here since the beginning of time. How do you explain things like the pyramids and the ancient gods that all these ancient civilizations worshipped if it's not extraterrestrial based?
Well, there's some really interesting stuff around that, isn't there? And I'm a huge fan of the show Ancient Aliens. I love that. I love listening to that. I love trying to debunk it. I kind of sit there on my couch with a really skeptic perspective, and sometimes it is hard. I mean, you see some of the paintings, don't you, and things like that, and you think, geez, that is pretty compelling evidence. It's like a picture of a cow and then something above its head or whatever. So I think that, yeah, I don't know what to make of it. I guess it's always subjective when it's a drawn image, painted image, or something like that. So there's that, I guess. There's a really great documentary, actually. So if you've not seen it, definitely watch it. And your listeners should definitely watch it as well. And it's called The Revelations of the Pyramids. So if anybody's not seen that documentary, it's available on YouTube, I think, if you search it. What a great documentary. I'm absolutely hooked. I must have watched it 20 times. And in isolation, it gives you all of these different sort of little tidbits of evidence on the pyramids, and each one of them is like the most outrageous, ridiculous coincidence. But when you string them all together, there's like 100 of them or something. So and when you get 100 coincidences together, they're just that's no longer a coincidence. So there are some huge questions, I think, over things like the pyramids that we need to answer. I mean, could we engineer that type of structure today? Maybe, but we should be able to do it easily, shouldn't we? We should be able to do it. You and me, Jeremy, should be able to knock up a pyramid like that as accurately in our backyard. But we stand no chance, even with all of our machines and our technology of getting this stuff so accurate. And you would have to ask the question as well. One thing that really gets me about the pyramids is that we don't engage in projects like this anymore. And when I say projects like that, I mean these multi-generational projects, because the people that put those pyramids up weren't putting them up for themselves. They were putting them up for generations and generations in the future. And I guess the closest thing that we've got to that at the moment are like big cathedrals and churches and religious buildings that have probably stood for a few hundred years. But, you know, we're talking much longer than that for the pyramids, aren't we? So it's a really interesting area of research. I don't know anything about it from a scientific perspective, only from the stuff that I've watched on documentaries and stuff on the television. But it is really interesting, and I think there's a huge amount of unanswered questions about it for sure.
I mean, yes, they were put up for generations in the future to know about. And hey, Charles, how's it going, buddy? Glad to see you watching. And yeah, you want to talk even further from the UK? Let's talk Texas. But Texas is closer to Japan than is UK. But I mean, I don't. I mean, yeah, they're putting them up for future generations in a selfish way, though. They're putting it up in a very selfish way in order to promote themselves. Basically, the pharaohs, they just wanted to like make themselves be immortal. They didn't care about the people of the future. It was just, you're gonna remember me, and like, I'm gonna build this. I'm gonna make slaves, or even maybe extraterrestrials build this huge monument towards me. Does it have sinister purposes besides worshiping me? Maybe. I'm not gonna tell you that, but maybe. Like,
maybe, yeah, maybe. I mean, they were pretty clever, weren't they, with doing things like shaping the blocks. So the blocks, you know, they just took the blocks and shaped them to use the least amount of material possible, because the material and the resources were so precious, because they had to travel so far and they were, you know, very, very heavy blocks. So they didn't like make square blocks or oblong blocks or triangular blocks or whatever it might be to tessellate the pyramid in some convenient shape. They just cut the minimum amount of material off the blocks to make them fit perfectly together, with no bonding agent either. And they're like, it's the most earthquake-proof structure that you could possibly build. They're incredible. I don't know if you've ever been, but
oh god, no!
yeah.
Like I said, financial restraints keep me from going over the sea. But I've been on the sea, but I've never been over the sea. But I mean, yeah, they're fascinating structures. They truly are, Charles. And to me, I mean, I see the memes on Facebook all the time where it's like a pyramid's connected by, and like then you'll see like underground, there's these long buildings underground connecting all the pyramids. And
really?
It's like, what if the planet was built around the pyramids? Like, what if the pyramids were here first? Like, what if they're alien spaceships and they're buried in the ground waiting for a day to come? Like, that's the type of stuff that I like to wrap my head around and be like, okay, what if this is true? What if this is a possibility? Why and how?
I mean, I get where you're coming from with it. I mean, I've certainly seen some things, mostly in that film that I was talking about, that you can see on sorry, not Netflix, YouTube, and there are some really fascinating things in it, like I guess where they look at certain parts of the blocks, and those blocks have got what, for all the world to you and I, would look like machining marks in them. So where they've been drilled, but you know, these guys just didn't have any kind of technology at all. I mean, they shaped the blocks by whacking them with another block and a you know, primitive chisel. So this is not really you know, something that makes logical sense, is it? And there's another thing as well, actually, which again is part of that documentary, and I guess not a lot of people know this, but the Giza plateau's on a slight hill, and in order to supply that particular area with water, the Egyptians took water from the river, from the Nile, and I think it's probably for about 2 or 3 miles, they made it flow uphill using no pumps. So there's no question about the fact that the Egyptians were genius engineers, absolutely genius engineers. And things like, I guess, the pyramid is aligned to true north. It's got 8 sides, not 4. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
So making an 8-sided object is infinitely more complex and difficult than making a 4-sided object at that level of accuracy. The 3 pyramids line up on the solstice with the stars of Orion. It's a fascinating structure, and we don't know anything much about it at all, I don't think. But yeah, I think maybe if I hadn't have got into astrophysics, maybe I should have gone into Egyptology. So I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I mean, and that right there, like everything you just said, that water flowing up fucking stream. I mean, come on, that's got to be extraterrestrial technology. I mean, come on.
I know we can do that. Now we can do that. Now we can make water flow uphill. That's not too much of an issue. But I guess to do it without a knowledge of fluid dynamics and all this different stuff that we would do now, that we would use now, you know, these guys had got like bits of bamboo cane and little stoppers. That's how they made it flow uphill. They're very clever, very, very clever. There's actually another great piece of work that your listeners should go out and check out as well. And this is, I'm sort of like flying the flag for the boys here from the UK. So there's one of our guys, Graham Hancock, and he's been working, he's like a sort of, I don't know, I suppose you could call him a natural historian in a way. And he's been working for about 30 years on this big enigma that there's a lost civilization. This is what he thinks, and he's on like a one-man mission to prove it. He's got some great documentaries that are available on YouTube and Netflix, I think. And yeah, he is utterly convinced that that at some point, probably around the last ice age, there is evidence of a lost civilization completely. So a civilization which displayed enormous levels of technological prowess and intelligence for the time.
Yes.
So so it's kind of a cool.
And that is commonly believed by paranormal enthusiasts to be,
I could believe that.
to be the Palladians.
Okay.
Are the basically the parents of star seeds. I don't know if you heard that term before, but and basically that ties into like what I was going to ask you next, actually, because you're not the first. Well, actually, it's not what I was going to ask you next because I have another question before we finish up here. But a lot of people believe that's where Atlantis comes from. Is there was an ancient civilization that was aliens and they created humans or they bred with humans, take your pick. But I mean, it was an alien human race, like mixed race civilization. And they eventually got killed off by the Greeks, the Romans, and all these other tribes of humans that were getting power at the time.
Sure. I've certainly not heard that story, but I'd like to find out more about it. It sounds interesting.
Well, Palladians. It starts with PLE, and you got to Google the rest because I don't know the rest off the top of my head ever.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I was have to Google the spelling, but so that's. I mean, I've had whole episodes about that, about people who were discovering Atlantis and that it was a Palladian mixed society with humans. But
okay,
the final question I was going to ask before we wrap it up for the night is because I've had other astrophysicists on the show as well, and I am curious to your opinion on this.
Okay.
How do you explain the thousands of humans that say they've been abducted by aliens?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I think we have to be careful. I think as with everything, Jeremy, I think there's a mix. So I think there are absolutely some people that aren't telling us the truth, for sure. In the same way that there would be with anything that we ask. So I'm not saying that about everybody, but I'm saying there is a percentage, I don't know what that percentage is, but a percentage to be decided amongst ourselves of people that absolutely aren't telling us the truth. There's then another percentage of people that believe that they're telling us the truth, but that's in reality, that's not what's happened. So for sure, that is another group of people. And I think we do come to a smaller group of people, again, a subset of people from there that believe that they've gone through that experience and have in some instances, I would have to say, from what I've seen, some relatively compelling evidence or stories. The problem with this is, and let me explain this because I think this would be really interesting to your listeners, and the reason that I'm struggling with this from a scientific perspective is in every other walk of life. So if like you and I go down the street, whether it's in America or whether it's in the UK or whether we're in another part of Europe or whether we're in Africa or Asia, and we commit a crime, and then we go to a court of law and we get like a judge that sits over us. If you've committed that crime and I see you do it, my eyewitness testimony then becomes your downfall. I'll say, yeah, Jeremy's guilty. I watched him do it. And that's good enough. And in a court of law, eyewitness testimony is the highest form of evidence. In science, eyewitness testimony is the lowest form of evidence, to the point where it's almost non-admissible. So if I go back to my colleagues and I say, I'm an astrophysicist, I'm a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society in the UK, I saw a flying saucer land on my lawn last night, they'd go, well, that's great, prove it to me. They wouldn't believe me, because it's that empirical, repeatable, provable evidence. And that's absolutely the way scientists work on that. So I guess that's why I'm struggling with this a little bit, because in every other walk of life, eyewitness testimony is the highest form of evidence. In my field, in my occupation, it's the lowest form, to the point it's not admissible, actually. Does that doesn't really answer your question? It's another cop out, but I feel like I've sidestepped it elegantly.
It's an elegant cop out, that's for sure. But but how do you take in the cases of then, say, Barney and Betty Hill or Travis Walton, who were put under hypnotherapy?
Travis Walton. I don't know too much about Barney and Betty Hill, and I've heard the story. Travis Walton, I do know. I would say probably as much as the rest of us about Travis Walton.
I mean, you can go on YouTube and listen to the therapist recordings with Betty Hill.
Yeah,
and both her and Barney's stories line up in her therapy completely, and they line up with what would become a regular alien abduction story for the rest of the time, basically.
It's really difficult, isn't it? And let me liken it to this. I was always going to bring this back to science at one point or another. So let me liken it to this. It's going to just humor me for 30 seconds while I go around this story. When life developed on Earth, and we don't really know how that happened, but we've got some strong hypothesis about how life was formed on Earth. So we think it was probably formed around a hydrothermal vent at the bottom of the ocean, where we'd got nice kind of soup of organic chemicals, some energy, some heat, and we think at some point there geochemistry turned into biochemistry and life sprung up. So that's how we think microbial life happened. So, and that existed on planet Earth about as early as it possibly could. So about as early as it was possible for that to spring up on Earth, it sprang up. And it lasted like that for a few billion years. And then we had kind of, I guess at that point, two kinds of, or more than two, but two in the main squidgy bits of bacteria that were floating around. We had bacteria and archaea. And we think that an archaea consumed a bacteria and survived. So those two single-celled organisms, one consumed the other one. It survived, and when then those cells divided, they divided as a hybrid, and that is where intelligent life sprung from. Scientists call it the faithful encounter, and we think it probably happened on planet Earth once, and that's where everybody came from. And that is why you'll hear people say, oh, I think an octopus is from an alien from another planet. It's not an alien from another planet. It's 99.8% the same DNA as you and me. So these types of things. And the reason that I've said that is because if we go back to the Barney and Betty Hill thing, it could have happened once, Jeremy. It could have happened once. could have happened twice. Travis Walton could be a second one. That is for sure. We can never, ever completely refute someone's story until we start picking it off for evidence. And it might be, if this phenomena is real, that it has happened just once or twice, like the inception of life on Earth. Because that's really weird. Everyone will have these ideas about how life sprung up on Earth or how it might spring up on other planets. We're pretty sure that's how it sprung up on Earth. And we're pretty sure that that second instance to spur intelligent life only happened once. So if some of these experiences that people are encountering, an alien abduction being one of them, has only happened a handful of times, once or twice, and the rest of the experiences that people are reporting are erroneous, and there is a lot of misinformation in there and a lot of people telling us lies, then that is going to detract from those one or two true stories where evidence really starts to pour out. And then people like me would start to take notice of it. And I guess with something like the Travis Walton case, which I know the most about, just from from reading and watching the documentaries, the evidence there starts to compile into something that's pretty compelling. Travis can't remember his 4 or 5 missing days. His friends all passed polygraph tests. He turned up again. He'd got a spectacular story, and has never moved from it. And I don't think the guy's been the same since. So it's obviously he's been through an experience that has hugely affected him. He's got 5 or 6 independent witnesses. Again, eyewitness testimony for me is a low form of evidence, but when you get 5 people all seeing the same thing, then that's a little bit different. When they pass a polygraph test, again, it's not a perfect science, but again, it's more evidence, it's mounting evidence. So I think with that, I would have to do my honourable scientific thing and sit firmly on the fence again and say, I can't explain it, but I wouldn't try to in any other way than the scientific method.
And as Charles just said, they gain nothing by telling their story. So he believes both Barney and Betty Hill and Travis Walton.
Yeah, and I would agree with Charles in that sense as well. And also somebody like Bob Lazar has not only he's not gained anything from telling his story, he's suffered because of his story significantly. So there's no reason that Bob would choose to do this. He's not a guy that I don't know. I'm talking like I know him. I don't know him. I'd love to meet him, but he's not a guy that likes attention. So he's not, a media whore that's going around trying to write books and go on TV shows and talk about it. He hates talking about it. and it's wrecked his life. And there's no question about the fact that some of Bob's history as a scientist was erased. They did try to wipe him out. He spent a long time telling people he used to work at Los Alamos, and that evidence was removed until some evidence, remaining evidence was uncovered, and I think they found him in a yearbook or something. And he also took he's a nuclear physicist. He took some tests. That's not something that you don't kind of rock up somewhere and tell someone you're a nuclear physicist if you're not. Because if you get tested, like Bob's pretty compelling on his. He's pretty good at the tests. He definitely knows what he's talking about. So he not only did he not have anything to gain from that, he actively lost from conveying his story. So I don't know what to make of Bob. The one thing that really grips me about Bob's story is it all seems to hook around the propulsion system of the craft that he claimed that he worked on. And that's all, that's pretty good. I can understand Bob in that. I can understand what he's saying. It makes sense. It's the type of thing that we would try to do from a science perspective. I can figure out in my head how he's saying it, how he's saying that it appeared to work. I get all that. What really troubles me is that it all hooks around this sort of element 115. So he was saying the craft was the fuel source, if you like, was this mysterious element 115, and then there was which didn't exist at the time, and then there was like this big
Oh, lost you there, buddy. Mid-sentence. Oh, there we go. Yeah,
Hey,
lost you there for a second.
am I back? Sorry, I think my main camera, Jeremy, just kind of ran out of battery. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'll just finish this little story off. So yeah, so Bob had this kind of thing about element 115. That was his big. That was the element 115 was the fuel source, and it was something. It was an element that didn't exist in the periodic table, and then later on, much later on, 20 years, 30 years later, scientists discovered it. And then all of a sudden, it was on the periodic table, and Bob was absolutely, he was kind of held up on a pedestal and said, "Okay." So it turns out Bob was right. Now, my problem with this is that elements on the periodic table are classified by number. So if I just say to you, I found something and it uses element 215 on the periodic table, there's a good chance that 215 will be discovered at some point, because when we find a new element, we give it the next number in the sequence.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my problem with that. It was a cheap shot guess, and I guess I don't know whether Bob is telling the truth, and that just happens to be a bit of a niggly coincidence. But that was kind of, it's kind of me predicting that before long it's going to be 8 p.m. or something, and then all of a sudden 8 p.m. rolls around and I'm right. It was inevitable that was going to happen. So I guess what would be really compelling, really, really compelling, and what would turn me from a skeptic into a believer is if the work that goes on in science examines element 115, which at the moment is radioactive, so we can't use it, and they manage to find a stable isotope for element 115. And that sounds like a nothing. It might be a real, it might even sound almost like gobbledygook, I guess, to your listeners. But that, to a scientist, would be irrefutable proof that Bob Lazar was telling the truth. It wouldn't take...
Exactly. And we don't even have time to get into all the people that have reported being abducted by aliens and then come back and they have some kind of metal fragment in their skin that's not a metal that's found on Earth. Like, that's a whole other realm we could jump into. But before we get out of here, tell people where they can find your organization and everything you do.
Sure, thank you for that. Yeah, no, I'd really enjoy doing that. So my organization is called The Average Scientist. So we do a bunch of stuff in terms of research. So we work with various organizations to conduct real astrophysics research. But what we do on the outreach side, which you'll find predominantly on the website, is we write a bunch of articles. They're all accessible, digestible explainers. So if you want to know what an astrophysicist thinks a black hole is, you can go on there, and I've written some articles and some of my colleagues have, but they're not super nerdy, full of maths articles. They're written to be accessible. And what we don't do is we don't dumb them down and insult people. We just write the science, but without the math. So they should be relatively understandable and digestible for everyone. As well as doing that, we also produce podcasts ourselves, and we have a YouTube channel, we make videos, and we do live talks, of which I'd love to come over and do some live talks in the States. I haven't had the opportunity to do that yet, but I would love to. So maybe we'll see some of your listeners at some point over the next year or two in the States. But that's where you can find us online. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Just to shove in The Average Scientist and we'll come up. And if you want to go hit up the website directly, it is www.theaveragescientist.co.uk or .com.
Lovely. And if you're coming to the United States and you're on the East Coast, let me know. And I made to come to Bay Aliens with you on a live stage. But
we should continue this conversation over many beers.
Oh, I agree. All my listeners, you know where you can find me. Stay tuned for the outro if you don't know. But I want to thank Ian for coming on, because it's been an amazing episode. And maybe we'll work together in the future someday on something. We'll see. But certainly until then,
thanks so much for having me, Jeremy, and thanks everyone for listening.
My pleasure. And thank you to all my listeners, and thank you to all my watchers. I will see you all next time.